We've what we've done is we've got the main project page here. This isn't the final mixdown page, but we'll go into that a bit later. So yeah, I mean, where do you start? Drums, bass?
Drums.
Drums. All right, drums. So snares. Let's get into snares straight off. Snares used to be something that was it's definitely the hardest point of drum and bass as a mixdown engineer, as far as I'm concerned, because if you've got a crap sounding snare, your whole tune is ruined. So, you know, you used to spend months just working on a singular snare trying to get it to sound right, until eventually kind of got a technique down to get a good sounding snare together a lot quicker. And that was to break it down into 3 different parts. And that is a low mid punch hit, which is normally for us around the 200 hertz mark. We've done other ones, but that's generally where we're going to be talking about now. And then we got a high mid kind of snap, a clap, and then we got cymbals on top of that. And breaking it down into those bits, rather than trying to find one snare to rule them all, worked out a lot better. So I'll show you those bits.
Layering up the snares obviously definitely gives it the depth that you'll hopefully be after as well, but you'll see in a second.
So this is the main punch snare, basically. This is the main thing that's kind of carrying the weight in the snare throughout the tune. And then we got the high mid kind of snap. And then we got a cymbal on top of that. And more cymbals. So yeah, all of that together brings us to the entire snare, which should sound like this. So yeah, that generally is definitely the way we approach every snare now. Kicks are a lot easier, but has anyone got any questions on snares before we move on? No? All right. So, yeah. Do we compress it? Yeah. Yeah, okay, yeah, cool. So processing on those snares. We got the low mid of that would normally use, I mean, we're on Cubase. So it would normally be a little bit of compression, but it's only very soft. Rarely actually use compression. It's more using limiters and using the natural kind of push of the track to get everything moving and sound organic. And using a lot of, am I up on the screen? Yeah. So using the envelope shaper in Cubase is the preferred method we use, which really adds a lot of attack to your snare. Without it, I don't really like transient designers. I find them a bit uneven, and they just don't do what I want them to do. So this I find a lot more consistent. So yeah, it's basically that and a combination of EQ depending on the track and what the track needs for it to punch through. If that helps.
Is that a snare that you guys made yourself, or?
Good. Thank you. Did you guys make that snare yourself, or is it just out of a sample pack?
It's a combination of things. probably originated from two samples that are then kind of phase aligned together a lot better so that they hit really well. There's normally a magic spot where if you kind of zoom in to both waves quite intensely, and you can see the actual waves there, and you move those two snares together and move them out of sync with each other, normally you'll find a real sweet hit, and then the rest of them are all rubbish, basically. Yeah, and throughout making all of our tunes, we've sort of been writing a sample bank. So we have a lot of snares on stock now that we kind of go to, or we then put those together and phase align them and create different snares from the same snares, if you see what I mean, because of the amount of time that we've put into those snares, basically making them. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do enough work on those snares that we might find in sample packs to then make them our own, so you know it doesn't sound like anyone else, hopefully.
Yeah, so moving on, we got the kick. Generally don't find kicks so hard to get right. It's generally a case of using envelope shapers once again, EQing and finding a nice punch around the 80 hertz mark, and making sure that if you're going from a sample, I normally find that a lot of samples are more orientated towards house music, so they have a lot of bottom end on them, but those house kicks can actually be pretty cool if you just take a lot of the sub end out of them and a lot of the high mids out of them as well, so you're not taking too much space up in the kick except for where it needs to be, which is the weight. So yeah, you can't see that on this kick, but if I pulled another kick up, you probably would see. Let's go Vengeance. Everyone loves Vengeance. Right, here we go. So that's obviously way too much sub for a drum and bass kick, because that would be getting right in the way of where the sub would need to lie. So where normally start with a kick, this kind of kick, which is where our kicks normally come from, a house style kick, is we'd bring up the EQ, turn the analyzer on so that we can see what frequencies are coming through, and then just start EQing quite harshly on the bottom end and taking the peaks out of the low. And then those high mids I was talking about as well, you can see it there where my mouse is. And then cut some of the tail off of that kick as well, so it's way more snappy.
You definitely want it to be as punchy as you can get it, obviously. You know, in drum and bass there's so much stuff going on as well, so it's good to have it short, punchy, especially in our type of tunes that we make.
So then we're going to add the envelope shaper just to bring up the initial impact of the kick up. one thing with transient designing and the envelope shapers is that they, with bringing the bottom end up, they also bring the top end up. And so generally, I find once you've brought the attack up, you have to go back in and EQ again to bring those tops back down to rein it in, so that you hear all of the benefits of what it's actually doing, rather than just hurting your ears.
Switch that for a second. We're talking to Ruth.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so generally, as a starting point, somewhere around there, and then tweaking to whatever the tune is doing, and what key the tune is in particularly as well helps. Also, sometimes what helps bring the kick out quite a lot is a bit of saturation or distortion. Normally tube distortion, and on Cubase in particular, normally magneto, or something like that. You can hear the difference, and I'll let you hear the difference in a second properly, but it doesn't sound that good when you're listening to it soloed, but when it's in the mix, it brings out the extra harmonies in the top end, which make it sound much nicer when it's all rolled in together. Off. On. Anyone hear that? It's definitely there. So yeah, that's generally kick processing for us. As far as like drum groups and everything like that goes, there's no like bus compression or anything like that. We may group all of our drums to one group or bus, but there's not usually a lot of processing on there. It's literally just maybe an EQ.
Thanks. One question, you mentioned EQing the kicks to the key of the song. Can you show us how you do that?
Yeah, normally we just do that sort of kind of by ear.
Okay.
Or sometimes when you're looking at a graphic equalizer and the actual tune, you can see where the main sub is hitting, you see where the snare's hitting, and you kind of just mute whatever kick you have going on and just find the weakest frequency, the quietest frequency between the snare and the sub, and generally start around there.
But do you maybe also pitch kicks or?
Yeah, we'll sometimes pitch kicks, but
Okay.
it's normally just by ear and just thinking that doesn't sound right, if you know what I
Yeah,
mean.
cool, yeah.
And it's maybe sometimes using a frequency shifter or something like that, or pitch shifter, and just going through and just testing out and seeing what actually sounds good and what doesn't.
Right, thanks.
Okay. So if we move on to drum tops. So with tops generally, what we used to do, especially in dance floor music, you have to bring the noise floor level up, and just create that like sort of going on the whole time. So we used to do that when we started out by just literally putting white noise blanketed across the whole tune, and that sort of filled in all the gaps. But it's actually kind of a cheating way of doing it, because you're getting out of actually creating groove by doing it. All you're doing by putting loads of white noise behind it, and I say this because we've obviously made the mistake of doing it, is just losing a lot of the qualities of what could be in the top end. And normally you might not even know that those qualities are there. The tune's going off, it's all good. In a club, when a tune is loud, most tunes will sound good. But
yeah, the white noise adds no groove to the drums or anything, so it is kind of just filling empty space.
So what we did a little while ago, well, probably 3 years or so ago is we started just using cymbals straight off the bat and taking all of the frequencies out of those cymbals so that you're effectively kind of just using them as white noise or like shimmery cymbals instead of actual tonal cymbals, so that when you actually want to create a groove with a hi-hat or something that has a frequency, you can actually hear it and it actually pokes out as something that's usable. So we always have a wash in there. Hopefully there's a wash in here. Here we go. Wash one sim. I know, that's literally just one symbol. I'm going to find it, 1 second. There she is. All right. So this is the main thing really that's keeping the track going. Without that, you're not really, there's no real energy to the tune. And then you obviously add around that with hi-hats and more hitty things, and the wash one sim that we've got in there. So there's that. There's the one wash sim. Then there's the hats. So all of that together and then when you add the cymbals in there from the snare that we were talking about earlier, that fills in the gaps.
It also gives you a lot more freedom to be able to do kind of what you want in terms of panning stuff and getting a different sound to your drums as well, rather than just having one bit of white noise filling up all the space that's not really doing anything.
Yeah, for sure. And so what we got here now, if I just play all of those and the snare and the kick. So that's not grouped. That's all. The only things that is grouped there is all the snares together, and all the rest of it's coming out the master output, basically. And there's a mastering chain on the master output, which we'll go through at the very end. So, any questions up to now? Yeah.
Reverb.
Yeah, I've got the question. You use some reverb effects on something like this, on this...
Yeah, on the snare sometimes we use a bit of reverb.
Because you told about the white noise, yeah, and
yeah.
So I think you can make it with some reverbs, but how much? Yeah, can you show us if it's there, if it's not, so you can keep it cool, clear?
Yeah,
You can definitely use reverb on it. I mean, white noise actually works quite well if you just record it and use it on top of the snare sometimes as well, as an extra part to the hit.
With regards to reverb, on cymbals there's normally some reverb processing, and there's a certain reverb unit that we use that has really helped us create our sound actually in a way, just because it's really vibey reverb. It's got a lot of soul to it, which sounds weird saying it, but it really does. I'll show you that reverb. So it's called Arts Acoustic Reverb, and it just sounds really nice, just going off the internal patch here. and then just going from there.
Okay. So it's on the final bust of the highs, or
No, this is just on singular. This is all treated singular.
yeah, okay.
So it's all treated singular, yeah. So there's no, as far as these drums are, it's sometimes different with different tunes, but none of this is grouped, basically.
Okay,
It's none of the drums are going to one singular bus.
Okay, in the situation with the kick, yeah, the kick should be a little bit shorter, for example, to make it. I saw the shaper, yeah. So you use the kick for compress the shaper for something like compress the kick and make it a little bit shorter and to respect the highs, yeah, to keep the flow for highs. It's not easy to tell it English, yes, sorry.
No, it's cool, man. It's cool. Yeah, so like, I mean, with regards to the kick and the top end, there's normally a hi-hat mimicking what the kick is doing to accentuate the top end of the kick. And also, because on most of the kicks, you only get the, which is not really nice. It's not nice to listen to. So that little hi-hat on top of the kick drum gives the top end body to the kick.
And the
Basically.
last question,
there's no reverb though on the kick.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit on the snare sometimes, a really short,
yeah.
200 hertz.
And sidechaining about on the highs? Sidechaining for the kick on the highs, it's important, or do you think it's not so needed?
Yep. Sidechain on the kick and snare to all the tops, a lot of the time. That's something that we would normally do in the next stage of the project. So yeah, but I'll go into multiband compression and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, you can do it manually, but if you sidechaining, for example, with panning, you can make something special to it, but it's not important as often as I tell it now, yeah? Okay, thank you.
All good, man, all good. So, so there's the drums. I think if we just go into the bass, the pluck and glock, and the talking and stuff and how we processed all that, and then we can just go into the final mixdown page. This is still just the sort of initial kind of ideas down on the page, kind of got there, but the project got so big we had to make it smaller again so we could finish it. So where are we at here? Bass. The bass in this tune is really, really simple. It's literally only a sub, a really punchy sub from Razor, and a bass top, which is basically just a saw wave. So I'll just take you through that quick. So this sub, I'll bring up the where it's from. Don't know if I should let you in on this secret. But this sub has smashed it. So it's in Razor. Have you all heard of Razor? It's a Reactor 5 instrument. Love Reactor 5. I love, Reactor. I've been playing on it for years and years and years. But in particular, this synth is awesome, really awesome. That's the sub with a bit of tweaking. With this particular sub, it's a filtered saw wave again. That the resonance is boosted on, and then the key tracking on it, so that every time you hit a different key on the keyboard, the filtering moves in relativity to where to what note you're playing. Does that make sense? So it's filtered saw wave, and then normally, because there is quite a bit of top on this, it's more of an 808. type thing. So normally there's a high cut on there, and then the punch on the sub is normally played around with depending on the tune, and if we want held bass, then it's not punching as much. If we in this type of tune, there's loads of punch on it because it's doing the chugging thing. So. So yeah. So we literally just high cutting. Quite harshly, and then if there is a need where we're going up in pitch a lot, then we will automate that high cut setting so that it lets the note come out naturally, rather than it bringing the level of the note down when you're going up. So yeah, I mean that's pretty simple, really. In terms of the bass top, I'll just play that for you quickly. So without this, the tune just doesn't have any energy at all, actually, really. I'll play the tune without it quickly, so you can hear that. It does still move, it's alright, it still sounds good, The
original idea actually didn't have the pluck over the top of it, so it just dropped with the sub and the top bass. And the final riff, which obviously everyone knows from this tune, was added right at the end, basically.
And this is what it sounds like with it in, which... So yeah, this bass noise is from one of the stock Cubase synthesizers called Retrolog. It's just a really nice saw sound. It's very simple to make. It's literally just a stock saw wave on there with some filter cut on there on the envelope. Would you like me to make that, or are we good on the saw wave? All right, we'll move on. So pluck. That is here. So this is two noises. One is a massive patch, and the other is a vengeance sample. The vengeance sample is more of kind of like a Glock. It's got a nice punch in the front of it. And that's the synth top on it, basically, which is carrying the body of it through the track. And then this is all grouped together, and I'll take you through all that. So yeah, so this main synth noise that was made is again just from the internal massive. When it loads up, it's the sound that's there. And then, I mean, we all know massive by now. bring one up. Bearing in mind this was kind of, I mean, Serum was about now, I suppose, but we certainly didn't have it. So we were still quite heavily on massive at this point. So yeah, just taking the voicing up to 3. 3 was always the amount of voices we like to use, because when you pan it from left to right, it means you've got left, right and mid. Whereas if you've only got 2, or you've got, you know, those other numbers, there's nothing in the middle, and I find that it kind of ruins the directness of the mix-up for me. So yeah, pan position totally to the right, and then pitch, unison spread. Take that off 1, and just doing minimal amount here to add that chorusy effect. And then adding a few effects, and it was really simple. And the sine shaper, which gives it its more kind of rounded off square feeling. And then when that's sent to all the buses, which I'm about to go through, you'll hear that it becomes that sound. So yeah, that's that pluck top really behind that sample. So yeah, any questions on that? Cool. So yeah, so those 2 sounds are sent to one bus, which is this one here. Yeah, pluck, pit, stop. And then everything from that there is using sends to send to other buses. There's 4 other buses which are being sent to with different effects on. So that pluck, pit, stop is actually pretty dry. It's a dry bus, and then using the other buses to make it wet. There's also side chaining on those other buses, so that when the clean noise, you want the initial clean attack not to be wet. So that initial clean attack is side chaining all the rest of the other buses, so that you don't get any wet when it hits, and then you get all the wet after it hits, which creates the wet but direct feeling, I suppose. Don't know if I should have said that.
It definitely adds to
This
the
is in
atmosphere
audio
of the whole
terms,
track.
yeah, audio terms.
Might need to bleep that out.
And you'll see that a lot. I mean, in our mixdowns, we do a lot of frequency dipping and multiband side chaining to everything within the mix. But again, we'll go into that a bit later. So
All of that stuff as well, kind of keeping it wet afterwards, definitely adds to the atmosphere of the track, especially when you get onto a big system. You know, it really, really adds and builds up the atmosphere for it.
From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest.
So that's the dry sample, basically, of the vocal. We have affected that quite heavily and came with this.
From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest.
And then all the affected vocals are all just bounced out into other channels, so that it's saving CPU and it's way more under control that way, rather than being kind of tailing over other bits of vocal or anything like that. So
From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular.
So yeah, we got all those weird little bits on top, which are kind of creating the atmosphere, I suppose, within that bit. The main vocal was changed using the mouth in Reactor 5. And I personally find it quite an uncontrollable thing to use, but it does sound really, it's a really cool sounding effect for vocals for sure. Yeah. Do you all know the mouth? Yeah? No? Oh, I'll show you. So this is the mouth, and it's kind of like, it's basically a vocoder slash vocal effects, or anything you want to put through it effects, really.
That's here. From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not...
It's working well. Let me get this up again. So, the mouse. Okay.
Not seem of any particular interest. From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest.
Yeah, and just flicking through there and just finding some stuff that
Vantage point, the Earth might...
is a good starting point, I would say. So yeah, that's that. Right, is there anything that you would like to know before we leave this particular project file and move into the final mixdown stage? No? Okay. So yeah, what we do when we've got our tune as it's kind of laid out finally, we'll bounce that down to a series of stems. So it'll be a singular or maybe a couple of snare stems. There'll be one kick. There'll be hi-hats. There'll be cymbals. There'll be just one top bass, a sub, and then rises and effects and things like that. So you get your project from whatever it is, 40 to 100 tracks, down to 20 or 15, which really helps when you're starting to tidy up the project. Also, I find that bouncing it down to stems is a way to make the track sound way more solid than it would. Because I mean, sometimes you get tails of things that will hang over a drop that you've missed, or just sounds that are getting in the way of the snare hitting, or something else you want to be happening in the mix at that time. So doing this is cutting out all of that audio.
Yeah, it's the best way to tighten up the track fully.
Yeah. So I'll just play you this final mix down, and then we'll go into some multiband sidechaining and stuff like that.
From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. But for us, it's different. Consider again that dot. That's home. That's us. That's here.
So yeah, so once this all comes together, it kind of you kind of know when it all starts working. The difference between this track and the last project was that the last project was a whole tone up from this, and this was like on the night of having to give it in, it was a last minute decision to be like, right, let's stick it down to F, which is really the key that works best in a club, just because all systems will play an F note on the sub really well, generally. Any lower, and sometimes you'll find that that certain club systems won't be able, you just won't hear the note, it will just disappear. And G, a lot of people make stuff in G and all sorts of other keys, but generally F and G and around there are good keys to be in. So yeah, multiband sidechaining. With this, I'm just going to start from the beginning of it so that we all know we're all on the same page. But basically, what it is, multiband sidechaining is, if I bring this up, we use the Waves C6 SC. There are other ways of doing it now which are a lot easier, but we're still doing it this way. So we can tell a specific frequency band to dip whenever the snare hits, or whenever the kick hits, or we can tell the bass top to go down in the frequency of the pluck when the pluck hits, so that you're getting a very direct story of the tune, and also that allows you to get the tune much louder than you would be able to without doing this. Basically, it's a really important part of making dance music these days, and getting things to sound loud and clean at the same time. So, for starters, all of this is, there's a main kick and snare side here, so everything is sidechained to the kick and the snare. So that is that bus without the kick and the snare. You add in the kick and you'll start seeing stuff happen. Oh, hello, like Cubase crashing. Sweet. This drawing, by the way, is by a guy called Coin from the Netherlands. Very talented guy. Any questions while we're waiting for this to load up? Anything? No? Okay.
The multi-band sidechaining will really also, not only does it help obviously with the kick and the snare punching through, but it adds to the movement of the track as well. So this bass line is obviously pretty bouncy and there's quite a lot of movement. That sidechaining really helps insinuate that.
Yeah, this line, when I put the kick in, this yellow line here represents what frequencies are ducking and the velocity of those frequencies ducking. So when I bring it in, and then when you bring the snare in, this is the snare sidechain. So that's quite tight, around the 200 mark, around 100 each side, probably giving it space of the main snare frequency, and then just a little bit on top, just to let the tops of that snare come through and push. Yep, so there's that. The sub is always, our subs are always sidechained as a singular thing. So yeah, here. again, you can see it there cutting down. Generally don't actually sidechain the very, very low. It's only, as you can see here, the cutoff here is at 51 Hertz. And that's because there's not a lot going on in the kick below 51 Hertz, so figure that we might as well leave it there. Which allows the sub to come through all the time while letting the kick be punchy, basically. So yeah, the sub is only sidechained by the kick. And so back to the question earlier about cymbals and sidechaining with the rest of the drums. With cymbals, generally, sometimes we'll put LFO tool on there. LFO tool is basically like you can draw in volume dips into there. So I'm just going to stick LFO tool on there so you can see. This is a very extreme example, but something resembling that. And so normally this would just be on a quarter time, so that it is dipping on the kick and snare, or wherever the kicks and snares are. Also, sometimes we would group all of the hi-hats and top end of the drums and just put a multiband sidechainer on there and sidechain everything up to about 13, 14k kilohertz, so that you don't get any of the body of any hats that are going on when the kick and the snare hit. And generally that's, again, quite a direct and nice way of doing things. So, yeah. Anything else you want to talk about? No? Yeah?
How do you treat the mids and the sides differently? Like maybe general stuff you can say about it, maybe in the mastering phase?
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, we always check just to make sure that the mid is strong and punchy, and that there's, and then does everyone know what mid and side is, starters? Why don't we'll just check, we'll just do that quickly on the master output so you can see. So, I'm just going to do it on this EQ. So, mid-side technique is really great, and is something that you should be using, well, I think that you should be using, you don't have to, instead of dimension expanding and stuff like that, because dimension expanding is kind of fake. It's enforced, and it ruins your mid. When we started writing tunes, the ethos was actually to make everything mono, because that's the most direct thing in a club. Certainly your sub, kick, and everything below probably 200 hertz should be mono, I would say still. You can break the rules and do whatever, and if it works, then that's wicked. But generally, what we do is that because it sounds stronger, and then everything up the top you can be way more playful with and get wider. And this is really the cleanest way to get wider, by you know, either taking down the mid in the top end. So what we do here is on this bottom here, where channel mode is, you go down to mid side. We're going to stick a high shelf in, and I'm just going to bring, just to be extreme, this all the way down, and we're going to tell it to be a mid here. So this is going to take the middle of the sound down, okay, around here, wherever that is. There we go. That's only the sides you're hearing, basically. So you can hear that all of the bottom end and the drums basically have all gone because they're all in mono. And then if you went the other extreme and took all the sides out, so now I'm just gonna make this high shelf here a side instead, and I'm gonna bring that all the way down. You're only gonna hear the mono, really. You're pretty still. So it still sounds strong in mono, and that's the most important part when you're checking mid sides on your final makings of these tunes and the mixdowns and stuff, is that the mid is strong. Because if your mid isn't strong, you just won't be punching through with other guys. And it's definitely the most direct way to even just get people dancing. Generally on the master output, as you were saying, to get back to your question, there's not a lot of tweaking going on the mid side, because as it's mixed down, that's all kind of intertwined into it as we're going. So yeah. Any other questions? Is that cool? That answer the question? Yeah? Sweet. So we could move on to the master output if anyone's interested in that. We've got on here the kind of standard kind of master output that we have on there is a maximizer going down, which is kind of basically just clipping the snare. I'm going to take all the mastering off just so you can hear what it sounds like without mastering. And generally with all the mixdowns, and most other people's mixdowns, not that I've heard all of them, but more than likely the drums are going to be way louder than most of everything else. The drums and possibly the sub. And that's because when you're putting your kick and your snare through all the maximization, compression, and whatever else you're sticking on there, those drums are pushing the track down and making it breathe and making it move. And that brings an organic kind of feeling to it, which is important to make the tune feel like it's coming to life. Otherwise it can feel very clinical and just not connecting, really. So yeah, normally start with, let me take these off. Normally start with just a bit of maximizer. And as you can see from here, yeah, the little red lines, it's only really bringing down the track when the kick and snare are hitting. And then you move on to your next one, which is a very soft compression, which is just kind of just adding a bit of niceness, really. So quite a slow attack and release generally for us on this stage. Everyone does it a bit different, but you know, and it differs from tune to tune as well. But generally, a nicer, softer, more sort of analog sounding compressor is normally added on there, or like a tape machine. So, yeah. And then everything that we've used on our tracks, master output for the past, well, since it came out really, sausage fattener. The sausage fattener. which is, it just brings out that final level. And if you were to put this on a track and you hadn't made it with this on the output, it probably would sound terrible. But because this is made with it on the entire time, you sort of make it going along and make it sounding good. So yeah, I mean, I'm not. There's certain things that I don't like about it on the master output. I think maybe sometimes the dynamics are a little ruined by it. But you kind of, it always sounds better to me.
Yeah, it can be. It's one of those plugins where it can be quite difficult to tell exactly what it's doing to the track. You don't quite know exactly, but it always gives it a nice sound and boosts it a lot.
Definitely, and I generally find that if you pull that gain, the gain knob, which is the tiniest knob down here, the little silver one, just down a dB or 2 dB, it drastically changes what is happening with it. It can change it from something that's making it sound really distorted to something that's sounding really, really good. Yeah, never touched the color button, really. Just the fatness, turn the fatness up and everything becomes fatter.
But for us, it's different.
So this is without. And this is with. And actually, when you compare the two, it does sound quite messed up when you put it on. But that's the only version you hear, so that's the one you're used to. So yeah, that's the general kind of master output. Sometimes it changes, and just like everything, what you use and how you get around problems. But generally, that's it, really. So yeah, any other questions from anybody? Or yeah.
You use some chains for bass and highs to make only bass in the mono and so on.
Which tune?
I'm in the bass, sub bass. Yeah, it's only for frequency when you mix down the final track. So
yeah.
You use the chains, yeah, for example, to make it into two tracks. Yeah, like one track is higher, for example, frequency from 300, and the second one is only mono, which one goes down and it's from 300 down and it's only into mono directly. Yes, such pattern is great, but the question is if you use it or it's not important, yeah?
The width of bass.
If you mean.
Is width good on bass, you mean?
Yeah, I mean the bass is important to put it only into mono.
The bass tops, they're not as important to get. I mean, they are important, but it's not like the sub, where personally I think the sub should be mono. But the tops of the bass can be as wide really as you like, but you still need to just keep in mind that there needs to be some kind of mono presence. Otherwise, it's just not going to be very direct. But if that's the effect that you want, if you don't want your bass to be direct at that point, then take all the mid out of it.
I know it by engineering, yeah, because of you can hear it, yeah, it's okay, but then you put it loud, and when your bass is in the stereo too much, I think it's overloaded and not so many space for another sound, yeah. But maybe when you put it into the mono, the sound is maybe fully weighted, yeah. I don't know. It was my opinion, so I would like to ask if you are into it or if you are not doing something like this into your final mix.
If we're not widening the bass or the final mix, you mean? Sorry, man.
If you are putting the mix down,
we'll get there.
We can talk later, man. Yeah, it's better. Hey, thank you.
Width on the top bass is totally fine, and it adds, adds to the track. But if you overdo it, then it just kind of, like you say, it can sound too much. But yeah, like Chris said, the sub really should be in mono, totally.
It just loses punch. That's all. It loses its direct feeling when you're listening to it. Yeah.
It's obviously specific how you want the track to sound, ultimately.
I will talk to you later.
Any other questions? How long have we been talking for?
On this particular track, do you have a sidechain from the pluck to the bassline, so that the bassline is stacking when the pluck is coming in?
Yeah. The
frequency based.
Yeah. The pluck, wherever the pluck is hitting frequency wise, is side chaining the bass tops.
Okay.
So that so that the bass tops can be louder, basically. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
So thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much. There's the prototypes.